Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on Friday signed an executive order tightening civilian access to guns. It's a campaign promise by Lula. He has pledged to disarm an increasingly gun-toting country under his far-right predecessor Jair Bolsonaro. Lula also argued guns were responsible for political violence in last year's election. It is one thing for a citizen to have a gun at home for protection and assurance, he said at a press briefing on Friday, but we cannot allow there to be arsenals of weapons in people's hands. Brazilian gun owners surged about eightfold under Bolsonaro's rule to nearly 800,000 registered owners. Gun culture proliferated with restrictions loosened on permits for hunters, marksmen or collectors. Lula's new decree states registered hunters will have access to fewer bullets and can now own 6 weapons, down from the previous 30. The 9mm handgun will no longer be accessible to civilians. New rules close a loophole that let many gun owners go out in public with loaded weapons if they claimed to be going to a gun club. The decree also lays groundwork for a buyback program starting this year for new gun owners in the previous administration. Lula also passed responsibility for civilian weapons control from the army to the federal police. The army was criticized for weak oversight and poor information sharing with law enforcement agencies.
And there they go. It looks like
The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1. The Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting. Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.